Hello, and welcome to the EX Factor by Crew Mojo, where we talk about all things employee experience and performance. I'm your host, Meg, founder of Pollinate XD, and on today's episode, I'm joined by Russ Heptonstall, who's been taking an innovative approach to people experience using Crew Mojo. So whether you're new to people experience or have been around the block for a while, this is a conversation I'm sure you'll gain some inspiration from. Russ, hi, thank you for joining.
Hi, glad to be here.
I hear from Mark that you're taking a very iterative approach, and he was really sure that we were going to have a great conversation. So I'm super excited to get into it. But before we do, can you give us a bit of a picture about your organization and your role and what your team looks like?
Sure. So the organization is Pixelogic Media, and we are based out of Burbank, California. Our business focuses on working for clients within the Hollywoodland area to provide services mostly in scripting and subtitling for productions in TV and movie and all that good stuff. But we also do tons of work for audio and creative and mastering services and all sorts of things like that for the studios within that area and around the globe. We actually are an international organization, and we work in languages everything from the stapleistic translations from Spanish or English to other languages. And now we do languages that are like the Korean product space has gotten very busy over the last couple of years with new and exciting content from there. So translating content from other languages into English so people stateside can enjoy it as well.
Wow, that's a really interesting organization. And what is your role and the remit of your role?
I work in the body proper of human resources. My role is the global manager of learning and development, but it spans well outside of that moniker. I am responsible for really talent management at a larger level for the organization. So everything from managing the learning systems within the organization to also looking at how we roll out performance and process improvement within the area of people development. And that's where my team tends to focus most of their time. And I have a small but mighty team. I have 2 direct reports.
Wow, sounds like you've got pretty broad remit then. You've got a lot going on.
Yes. Yeah. It's a very busy job, but it's also challenging and fun. So that's a great mix.
That's awesome. How do you decide what you're going to focus on and what gets your attention first?
That can be a delicate dance. I'm sure that there's plenty of people that are listening that would think the same thing. And it comes down to where the need is in most cases, because there is so much going on. We have to pretty regularly, probably once a quarter, talk to each other about, okay, where are we needing to focus as a team, and not just within the talent management space, but also within the human resources space, so that we can best serve our clients within the organization. So our team is very close knit. We stay in contact with each other on a regular basis. We meet about every 2 weeks as a global team, talk about what's going on, and share responsibility across the organization globally for whatever it is might be happening. So very rarely do I work in a silo within my team. Very often there's other people that are involved, and we're sharing information or sharing workload as a way to balance out and try to deliver things faster.
I love that there was a key word that you used in there, the word client. With it, like it sounds like you see yourself almost as an internal consultant to the rest of the
Yes.
business. I love that, because I think that when you perceive the people that you're working for as a client, in a way, they become your customer, right? And you're having to anticipate their needs. And the fact that you're doing that not in a silo within the talent space, but actually across the whole people function, and leveraging the various, skill sets and capabilities across the whole team is a really powerful move. How do you actually go about defining what the need is? How does that come about? How is that determined?
There are a couple different ways that we do it. One way is, of course, just word of mouth meetings, the feedback that we get from the folks that are in our team. Sometimes our top level manager will have a meeting with one of the leaders in another part of the organization and come back to our team meeting and say, just had this conversation. This is going to be something we really should look at. And then we talk about, okay, how do we do that? Who's going to be responsible for it? That's kind of the usual thing. But on the talent management side in particular, recently we've started taking to Crew Mojo helping us with pulse surveys. And we most recently are just closing down a huge effort to reach out to every employee within our organization to understand more about what they need out of the talent process. And it's kind of cordoned off into, you're in the job. How can we help you understand more about measures and metrics and things within your role and provide more benefit through performance exercises for the employees and the managers? Lots and lots
Mm.
of data collected there. So now we're sifting through it and trying to understand, exactly to your point, what direction we should go. What are the things we should be offering for development in specific areas of the organization? But also, how can we move the ball down the field as a global organization for everyone at kind of the same time? So we're trying to be macro and micro at the same time,
Yeah.
which can be a little tricky, but it's it's what we need to be doing to make sure that we're in the right space for our clients within the organization.
I love that. There's actually kind of I want to think of it as like a little matrix, right? Like you've got qualitative data that you're gathering through conversations with your stakeholders and your clients. That's really important.
Mm.
And you've got some quantitative data from people on the ground about their day to day experience, which is a key point there, right? Like you're not just thinking about what their aspirations are in their role or what some of maybe what people think of as the fluffy stuff of people experience, which is really important. Don't
Right.
get me wrong, but I think we have to remember at the end of the day, people are there to do a role and contribute something to the organization. And so the fact that you're grounding that data in what they're doing within the organization and their role, you've then got both your qualitative and quantitative, but you're looking at it both at the employee lens and down on the ground all the way up to your stakeholders and looking at managers as well. So that triangulation, I think, is a really important activity in determining where to focus. Mark mentioned that you've been taking quite an iterative approach to your work, particularly with regards to the experience of feedback and development. Could you walk us through a need that was prioritized through the work that you've been doing that you're proud about the way you've solved that need and the approach that you took?
The the biggest example in this, it's funny that we'd be talking about this because it led to where we are now with the iteration process and asking people for feedback at all levels within the organization. And a micro experience of this was several years ago when we were a little younger as an organization. One of the things that we were missing was a value statement. We had a mission and a vision, but we didn't have values that fell out of that we'd identified as an organization and said, this is what we stand for. So at the time, our co-presidents got together with some of our leadership and they had identified a list of, I can't even remember how many, probably like 50 terms that they thought would be good to start with to pare down into what could we stand for? What is it we want to show to our clients that this is the value add that we bring. And this is how we do our work. This is what we stand
Mm.
for, that married with those statements that we had before. A lot of that effort came this concept of, why don't we get the leadership to look at it at the top level and eliminate down to something manageable, say like 20 terms. And then we parse that out to everyone within the organization. And we said, we need your help. Identify for us what things you feel like are core to your employment here within the organization. And that was done at a global level. So everybody within the Cairo space, the South Africa space, our Korea space, just everywhere across the organization, we said, help us understand this. Then we boiled all those inputs down, brought them back to the leadership team and said, these were the ones that were most popular. looked at definitions and tried to understand what best aligned with our culture and our brand and all that good stuff. And then through that came not only the definition of our core values as an organization, but we also rewrote our mission and vision statements into essentially a purpose statement that now is our flagship offering and is represented actually on the background of our Crew Mojo website. So every employee comes in to that website, they get a listing of our values with clickable links to see some examples, but they also see our mission statement there as well.
Amazing. It's amazing how you can go from having 50 ideas of what it means to work somewhere and what we stand for and what you're trying to achieve. And someone at the top could have done the work to whittle that down and then say to everyone, this is what we stand for and you must all act
Right.
this way, which I've seen people do that before.
Sure.
A But the fact that you actually took a different approach and you went through this process of involving the next layer down and getting input and honing that even further and further until you got to a point where it felt like something that really reflected the organization, I think is really valuable. How once you have those value statements and now that they're within Crew Mojo and you're seeing them every day that you go in there, how are they being used then throughout the development cycle and the day-to-day experience of work, I suppose? What's been the next step in that journey?
So we've, of course, that sort of thing takes a while to see. The good news is that because of everyone voting on it, there was symmetry in seeing those things come to life within the different roles across the organization. So I don't think anyone looks at any one of those terms and says, I don't really buy into that. That's not really
Mhm.
part of my job, that sort of thing. So that alignment was really important just right off the jump. But then we started looking at how can we purposefully weave this into our messages, not only to our clients, but also to our internal set of employees when we do town hall meetings or when we're presenting new content or when we're offering learning and development opportunities because my team creates internal courses. We have a really robust LMS offering internally because our operation needs to be able to serve out learning at a moment's notice for the really technical parts of the operation that we have that
Mhm.
are unique to us in proprietary softwares that have been developed in house or maybe really high level technical like editing suites and things like that that we use for some of these projects that we work on. So trying to understand how we can weave those pieces of the value mentions into those opportunities as well is important to us so that we can continue to come back and anchor to those things and let people know we're not going to let this slide because it's a specific project or whatever. A good example is accountability is one of our values. So when we talk about, especially when we're talking about our external clientele, i.e. the people that the organization works for directly, we take that very seriously and that ties into our process for corrective actions on work and that sort of thing. Anytime anything happens with a client that's not what we wanted from a delivery time frame or errors or anything like that, we have a very specific process that we follow in a team even that follows that process to help the business understand how can we be better next time. And that relates directly to our values of not only accountability, but also aim for perfection. And how do we get better next time so we can hit that 100% or 99% or whatever the threshold is that we hold for ourselves. And as a result, across the organization, not only with our work, but also even with things like internal security, we have the highest rankings for all of those things. So our clients can be secure in knowing that we're doing everything we can to not only work the best that we can for them, but also keep their information and their intellectual property in particular safe. So the creations that they come to us with that they want to share with the world are safe and get into the correct mediums like they're supposed to.
Yeah, that's awesome. Especially that point about accountability, right? I think that that's something that weaving that into the day-to-day experience of work and helping people to understand what accountability actually looks like, that it's okay to get things wrong sometimes,
Sure.
but what happens when we get things wrong, I think people see accountability as like a stick to beat people with, right? But actually it can be something that is more about how can we take accountability from to learn from this
Yes.
experience. You've taken these values and you've turned them into something that is used within your LMS and your learning processes. What what was involved in going from this idea around the need that you had into really defining what that problem was and the solution?
Mhm. So that initial concept that I shared with you about coming up with the values in the first place and having everyone involved then became a broader conversation about more particularly how do we connect this to our talent management model? Because
Mhm.
we had been for a while managing performance management pretty much as a whole off the side of the desk, as it were. And I can take responsibility and accountability for this because when we came in, we didn't even have we weren't with Kumojo at the time. We hadn't discovered how great the organization was and how helpful. And can't say enough about Mark and his team. They're fantastic. Great, great partners to have. And I mean it when I say that. They don't treat us like just another business. They are 100% partners. They help us every step of the way and have been invaluable in the formulation of where we're headed. But we had to come up with something that connected to the values that we did try some direct connection things. And to be fair, it just didn't land the way that we wanted it to.
Okay.
Help us from your level understand what it looks like to be accountable and that sort of thing. So then we started looking at maybe going a level deeper and understanding how to bucket out what we're calling capabilities or competencies. They're relatively similar. But these ideas of how do we make it more granular underneath each value and have maybe four or five capabilities that fall out of each one that then we could do the same sort of iterative process with our leaders and our employees about which of these are most important for you and how would you define this for your role within the organization. So now it's not just my department, it's going to be my job. And how does that change if I go from one level to another and so on and so forth? And that's the process that you are talking to me that we are in the thick of right now. So we got the top level for the capabilities and from the leaders, and we introduced that concept last year in our cycle. And now this year, the data that we're collecting from all of the employees globally is more about their job. And the questions we
Mm,
asked were things like, of these seven capabilities that your leadership chose for you and your department, which ones are most important to you? And then the follow up question is, which of these three that you picked that you said two or three are most important would relate to the measures that or the KPIs that are associated with your role. So now we're taking it from these are the ones I like best or these are the ones that fit my role the best to boots on the ground. These are the metrics, these are the percentages, these are the things that we follow that say I'm either doing what I'm supposed to or I maybe need some help and defining those so we can then weave that back into the discussion for performance with managers and employees. So we're aimed directly at what their day to day looks like instead of playing at the edges and offering broad, open ended questions that they have to feel out themselves and understand between themselves or maybe not what is important within the role.
yeah, that's really important. It sounds like you've gone from this approach of understanding what the vision and mission of the organization is and having think at that really exact level of what are the behaviors that are going to drive us towards that
Mhm.
outcome and what are the things we stand for. You ended up with 50 statements that then through the process of co-creation and iteration got whittled down, but you've taken it a step further into each team and defining what the capabilities are that sit within those values for each team. So your capability framework is feeding directly back up into the mission and vision through those values.
Yes, exactly. And we
And
were very purposeful about that. We wanted to make sure that the bucketing for the capabilities aligned with all of the values. If there was something that was a term that we felt like didn't really fit effectively under one of those, then we scrapped it and didn't even look at it because we wanted to make sure we had that alignment.
you mentioned that there was something that you did that didn't quite work. Can you share a little bit about what it was that you tried, why you decided to try that, and what you learned through that process of experimentation?
Sure. So we tried a lot of things that haven't worked, but the
But
example
that's a
that
good
I
thing, right? Like
sure,
that's
absolutely.
A
I
lot of
mean,
people are afraid to have a go at testing things. They wanna get it right the first time, but actually it's through these experiments that you learn what does
yes,
work.
and one of the things that we've learned through that process is how to test better. That's
Interesting.
starting with smaller groups or reaching out to influencers within certain offices and we're helped a little bit by part of our performance process has us working on one group of employees before we get to the next group of employees globally because of some calendaring and fiscal limitations and that sort of stuff. So we can almost use a production test environment, see if it goes, and then make changes within 6 months and try again in the other theater and then iterate again. So that iterative process, we get at least a couple of goes at it, but we also do a lot of internal testing. Again, CrewMojo has a sandbox environment for us to use, so we can build and test everything in there, everything from performance check-in stuff like we're talking about here to plans and goals and tools and all of that stuff. And they've helped us really refine what that looks like. But the example that I used earlier about the quote unquote failure that we had was one of those iterations where we were coming off of the establishment of the values and we decided to try to align those with the yearly performance review is what most people call them. We call it performance check-ins, but it's this yearly opportunity for an employee to talk about their performance. And then the manager pours over and fills out mirror questions with the same sort of look and feel. And then there's a conversation. They decide if there's anything that needs to change in the coming year, any development, any corrections on course, and then they move forward. And what we did was we tried to weave the values into that mix. And what we found was it was so broad that it didn't do enough to help with guiding the conversation. And before this, we didn't have anything in there with values or whatever. It was almost all open field questions. And going back and looking at it now makes me shudder a bit because it's so open. I mean, anybody anywhere could use it. It had our logo on it, but it could have been in any organization anywhere, and it was very difficult for a lot of these leaders and managers, especially those who were maybe new to the environment. They just got promoted into like a directorship. So now they're leading leaders, or maybe a new manager who had never done anything like this before to walk through that process without getting lost in the breadth and depth of what was possible within that.
Mhm.
So the lesson learned there was how do we pare this down? And that was the brainchild that led us to, well, maybe we could use something smaller. What does it look like in bite-sized chunks? We got into the idea of what if we were able to look at this from a role perspective? How would that work? And can the values work at the role perspective? Maybe not KPIs, all this stuff. How do we really get into that and understand it? And that's where the idea of capabilities came from after some conversations internally with folks who had worked with some of the bigger name companies that are known for these things like Korn Ferry and their competency models and those sorts of
Mhm.
things. Our organization isn't really big enough for a full scale rollout of something like that, like just off the top. So we had to figure out how to make it a little smaller and a little more organic. And that was where we came back to the concept of, well, we did it once with the values. Maybe we could just try it again with the teams. And thus far, lots of just really good feedback and information that we're still trying to decompress and understand how to use most effectively. And that's going to take some time, but we're eager to get in there and see what our employees are saying and how we can adjust that to make it more
Mhm.
valuable and easier to use.
It's so interesting. I think that the fact that you have stumbled across this problem, right? Which is if we do something that's too broad, if we give almost not enough guardrails, then it makes the process really difficult, especially for those new time managers or new time directors, to
Mhm.
have really meaningful conversations and to be able to recognize that and take that problem and find a solution to it that you can then pilot and test with a smaller group is a really powerful way forward. How did you how did you find the feedback was on that process itself? Like, and even through your values approach, what is the impact of taking a very co-creative and iterative and testing type approach? What what impact has that had on the perception of your team and I suppose HR in general within your organization?
It's funny because it's a little bit of a mix there because we're not an enterprise level company yet. We're relatively small, but we are global. There were different takes from different parts of the organization. Those who had worked like myself for enterprise class organizations were looking at it as, well, this is a bit of a breath of fresh air because like you mentioned earlier, leadership came up with these things and here you go. This is what you're going to do. It was more of the experience that some of us had had. And then there's the other side, which is almost a contrast of folks who grew up within the organization and even going through a performance conversation with their
Mm.
manager was new for them and something that they weren't exactly sure about. So maybe the response was a little hesitant and a lot of questions about why am I being asked to share this information? Why is this important? And that was a great conversation for us to be able to have to level set and say, this is something that we feel like is important for not only for the organization, but for you and for your team to understand where we should be performing and at what levels and what that looks like. And for the most part, it was seen as a extending of an olive branch. There was maybe a small group of people that were just basically saying, I really don't want anything to do with this. Is there a way I can opt out? And the answer was, sure, if you don't want to give us any feedback, but just so you know, you're not being involved doesn't make you any less responsible for these actions when they're brought to the table and we need you to speak to your manager or we need to evaluate performance. These are the metrics that we're going to be using. So would you rather be involved in that case and
Yeah.
have a vote, or would you rather abstain? And there were some people that did abstain, and that's their right to do that, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, most people were happy to enter in and offer their opinion as and so long as we understood as an organization we're not going to be able to honor every ask and go in every direction that everybody wants to see, but we're trying really hard to understand where the bulk of the organization wants to go. And again, looking at it from the perspective of like, one page talent management, right? We're trying to make things simple. We're trying to make things valuable. And those things can exist at the same time. And that was something that was a new concept for us maybe a year ago. We're trying to take all the complexity onto ourselves and analyze this mountain of data so that when we do an implementation, it's less complex and less time consuming for our managers and our employees, but it provides the value that they're looking for from that experience. And that's what we feel like is slowly changing the hearts and minds of those that maybe might have been reticent to engage in the past.
I just feel like I want to give you so much celebration and like applause, honestly, because it's there's so many threads I could pull on in there.
Mm,
One keyword you said was value for the
mhm.
employees and the managers. Sometimes people within the HR function and the talent function can get focused on how they make their processes easier and more simple for themselves, but
Yes,
inadvertently can sometimes make the experience for the end user more complex and
yes,
therefore drive lower levels of adoption. And adoption isn't necessarily the outcome we're trying to achieve, right? We're trying to improve a process that then ultimately improves conversations, which improve performance over time. So we can almost inadvertently make things more difficult for our employees to have those meaningful conversations.
right.
But the other thing, and so I think it's great that you've looked at whose value is more important in this. And
Mhm,
actually, there's benefit in us as a team taking on more of the complexity and bearing more of that weight so that our team members can get more from the experience and improve
mhm,
their performance over time. But the other thing I think that you mentioned there was, in product we talk a lot about the difference between early majority and the late majority and that kind of bell curve and the chasm in the
mhm,
middle. And it's actually natural that you're going to have employees who are a bit skeptical about this whole process and that are going to see what happens. But if
mhm,
it sounds like you've managed to get a lot of people on the journey and that it's helped them to feel part of the design of that process and have a voice in it. And a lot of people, I think, also avoid involving colleagues and managers in that co-creative process because they can't always meet their expectations. And it's almost like, I don't want to know about them if I can't meet them, right? But actually, if you go through this process and surface all the various needs and expectations, even if you can't build a process which directly meets those, you can at least then design communication around that process to explain why maybe a certain need wasn't able to be met, or why you made certain decisions over others, and it becomes much more transparent. And like, I love that terminology of the olive branch, right? Like, we're
Yeah.
trying to build a safe space for everyone in this process. So
Yeah.
congratulations, that's awesome. You mentioned earlier that you've learned a lot about experimentation through having done it now multiple times and iterating. I'm making a massive assumption here, but have you developed for yourself any principles or habits or rituals, or set guidance for yourself, I suppose, now around how to take this approach that you're taking in the most effective way?
Yes, there's a couple of key things, and it's like a calendar and a people thing kind of put together. So in the past, one of the things that's been a real challenge for us is implementation timing and understanding where it fits within the canter of the organization, when we're busy, when we're not, that sort of thing. But also just feeling rushed through the whole experience. And so we've gotten better with that over time. There have been a couple times when we poked our heads up and said, "Wait a minute, what date are we supposed? Oh no, we're already behind. We haven't even started. Holy cow, we got to get moving." But so we've learned to be better about that part. But the other piece that's important, the people aspect, is working more directly with our teams and our leadership across the organization to understand what tools or what solutions are better for them before we even start talking about what we think we should do next. It goes right back to what
Mm-mm.
you were talking about before, that collaborative idea, because we can sit up in our ivory tower and think all day long about the great things that we want to do that we feel like are going to move the ball down the field for the organization. But if we talk to the people that are doing the jobs, or maybe just a cut of middle managers to directors, we can get really quick, just in time feedback about what things they need that may not even relate to the larger solution that we're looking for. Great case in point, we had a team come to us at the end of last year about a solution for a problem. And it was a very open conversation. It was actually a drop in conversation. It wasn't even meant to happen. I poked my head into someone's office when I was local in the office in Burbank. And it was a couple of folks that I've had an ongoing relationship with, just wanted to check in and say, "Hey, are you good? Do you need anything from me?" That sort of deal. And they said, "We're glad you're here. We have something that we'd like to talk to you about." That conversation started the track for development of a tool that was released about a month and a half ago that has been more broadly accepted than anything else that we've ever planned on our own. And it was
Mm.
something that was a just in time or an ad hoc ask. And we started talking about it and started to realize, wait a minute, this could be something pretty big for the organization. And then, of course, when we went to Mark and said, "Have you ever seen organizations do this before?" He said, "Oh, loads of times. We got plenty of background and functionality to be able to support this." So they helped us grab on the idea, hone it, get it into the system, test it, and then once we got it into production and started using it, we announced it to the organization. I have not ever, since I started this organization, gotten as many individual feedback responses in email from people saying, "I just used this. This is great," or "This is so exciting that we're doing this," or that sort of thing. So it really speaks to trying to look at it from a people perspective before we look at it
Mm.
from a process perspective to understand, are we doing the right things? Are we aiming in the right direction? Because again, we can talk about process all day, until we're blue in the face in our little team or with the leaders. But if we're not plugged into what is needed on the ground level, we could be doing a lot of work in the background and potentially putting a lot of work in front of our usership that is not going to met us the value that this simple conversation that led to a simple tool is and will continue to provide value for across, hopefully, the lifetime of the tool in the organization.
I hear 4 principles in that story, and that's an incredible story, actually, and it
Mm,
answers one of my questions which I'll come to in a minute around impact. But so one of them you mentioned was being in tune with the cadence of the business.
Hmm.
And if a HR team, talent team, people team have their own roadmap that is not aligned to the cadence of the business, we're essentially pushing like almost against the tide, right?
Right.
Whereas you're talking about having a cadence which is going with the tide, making sure that your deadlines, your roadmap, the things that you're trying to put into place are aligned with the flow of the business so that it fits in with the experience of work.
Hmm.
The second thing is making sure that the tools and technology that we use to enable an experience fits in with the flow of work so that it's not another thing that people have to think about, but rather just meets them where they are. I love that. But the other two things that you mentioned within that story were it was a conversation that you had just by popping your head into the meeting or into the office rather. And it's interesting how, as people teams, we often sit as a people team somewhere else in the office, or, I've seen so many people teams that are over in the corner, like the back corner. And it's often because there is confidential stuff that they have to focus on that, needs to be private. But it doesn't mean that we should always sit there. There's work that we're doing where it's not private, it could be collaborative, and actually it could benefit us from going and spending a day sitting with the sales team, with the tech team, with whoever else. And that's one of the biggest benefits that we have in the people experience space in comparison to when I was a user experience designer. It was very hard to get my customers to agree for me to come and sit with them for a day, right? Like that's much more complicated. Whereas a massive benefit we have is we can just go and sit with the team and build those relationships and gather data and insight just from observation and conversations without it needing to be a whole discovery process. And I think that then also comes to the last point around the flexibility that you had. You hadn't backed up your to-do list to such a degree that you then didn't have the capacity to respond to needs in the moment.
Right.
And the fact that you were in a place where you could observe a need, really empathize with it, and then respond to it. And yes, holidays and whatever else can get in the way sometimes. That's natural for any team. But the fact that you were able to, readjust maybe what you're working on and make the time for that, I think is really valuable. So some great learnings in there.
Hmm.
How have you found then, you mentioned there that it's the first time you receive so many individual messages from people about the impact of that work.
Hmm.
But in general, in the work that you've been doing, especially around values and embedding them in the way that you're working, what has the impact of that been on the business more broadly and the performance of the organization, I guess, is probably what all of this is intended to do,
Sure.
right? Like how has it changed the actual experience for people and how have you measured that?
It's so part of the measurement is goes back to what we talked about with what we're doing now with the capabilities. So we're
Mhm.
starting to poke into I can't say we have a scorecard or anything like that for this. We absolutely have scorecards for our performance with our clients and the work that we do. And that's especially important for this linkage because it allows for us to now put more meaningful words, if that makes sense, to the work that we're doing for our clients. So when we sit down and we talk with them and we say things like accountability and aiming for perfection and those sorts of things, then they say, we know what that looks like. That idea of
Yeah.
innovation, like we're going to bring new ideas. We're going to be looking at the same old thing in a different way. And especially if you know anything about the space for entertainment, just even the transition from what the traditional environment looked like for the production of TV and movies into the streaming space was a huge transition, not just for our organization, but for the entire industry. So being able to bring those terms and that value, those measures to what it is we're doing with our clients and saying, really, what's important to you? How does that fit with what we do? And how do we make that more beneficial for you? And they really do align with that from the perspective of the work that we do and we want to hold ourselves accountable before they do, essentially,
Mhm, mhm.
to those things that we're trying to put forward is the value add, which is it's our brand. It's what we stand for. When people see the Pixelogic brand, we hope they would conjure those words. And if they see them alongside the brand, they would shake their head and say, yes, that's what we've experienced through the brand. And we interact with our clients we on a rate all the time, really, to make sure that they're getting the value that they need from us. And where they're not, then we're having those conversations to understand how we can do that better. But we're also measuring it on the back end for projects and for efficiency and those sorts of things to understand how it fits better and what it looks like from day to day. Because aiming for perfection on a project is that's new work, and the client says we want this level of effort from you, or we want this level of deliverable from you. We're setting the bar higher in a lot of cases than they're providing for us, so that we can show them that we really value their business and that we want to keep providing expert level service for them in any way that we can.
It sounds like there's a few benefits that have come from it. One is around the alignment and being really
Mhm.
clear about the expectations of the team in terms of how they deliver work for clients, but also the quality of work has increased, and to a point where it's almost that you're able to set a higher expectation of quality than what maybe the client would even expect. So going above and beyond.
Absolutely. And I can't say enough. We haven't had a chance to really cover this yet during our conversation, but the reason that all of this works is because the people within our organization are dedicated to doing the best job. Full stop.
Mm.
And our leadership recognizes that. They regularly pay lip service to that in town halls and in individual team meetings and all that stuff. One of our values is positivity. Everybody decided that, and it's a great value to have because I joke with people, it's not like that little dog emoji where it's sitting in the fire and everything's fine. It's not about that. It's instead about looking at challenging situations and saying, what's the upshot? Where can we win
Mm.
here? How can we be better? What are the things that we're doing to make the environment better, not only for ourselves, but for our clients? Does it get difficult sometimes? Sure. But more often than not, I'd say 98% of the time within our organization, there's people behind the effort that are saying, we can do this. We can pull this out. We can figure out how to do this better, or how to deliver on time or on quality for the client in such a way that they will not only be aggrandized by that, but they'll come back again and they'll say, wow, you guys did such a great job. And when that happens, the whole organization hears about it and everybody gets to celebrate together. And it's just an awesome environment to be a part of.
Mm. Yeah, it really does come across that you're working in an environment which values learning and development and learning through experimentation and collaboration, but also in an environment that demonstrates the recognition of the importance of that through appreciation and celebrating wins together. And that the wins that you have as a people function and the talent function are not your wins alone, that they're
Right.
actually the wins of the entire organization, and that by collaborating with your people on these processes, you're actually succeeding even more as an organization. So your success is shared success. Yeah.
Absolutely. A huge part of that was when we started making these changes for the capabilities, we were following those iterations up with pulse surveys that CrewMojo helped us put out. And one of the things that we were very, very, very focused on in that was making sure that everybody understood this is not going to drop into a bottomless pit and you'll never hear about it again. And you'll just have to figure out what we did with your inputs. Instead, we were very upfront about you give us these inputs within a month of our closing down this survey. We're going to come back and we are going to tell you what was said and what we're doing with this guidance and information, or what we could possibly do at any rate. And
Mm.
we originally were going to do it electronically and just send out an email. But my boss says to me about 2 weeks after we closed out, we were coming up with some of this stuff. She says, no, this is too good for us to hold down in an email. The next town hall, we're gonna talk about it there. So the whole organization was on when we dropped all that information and said, because of your input, these are the things that we're looking at doing. And that was so important for us our little team in particular, but for an organization, because we want to be transparent. We want to make sure that everyone knows your opinions and the things that you're telling us. We're not asking for information just to make you feel better and
Mm,
a supposed voice. We want you to be able to look at the things that are happening and say, I had part in that. I actually was helped in shaping the direction of the organization in this thing. And that's part of that ownership helps us to get usership and get buy-in on what we're doing next so that people can say, oh, okay, this is the next thing. How do I help? What are the things that I can do? And that's really important for us.
I mean, that's such a mic drop moment. The fact that by doing that work and getting people, setting expectations about how you're going to use that data and make them safe to share it in the first place, but also to then have it so that they're bringing information to you, you don't even have to ask for it, is a
Hmm.
huge win. Russ,
Yeah.
it's been so fantastic to walk through your approach. I could talk to you for hours. Before we close out, I'd love to get your reflection on, something that was the thing you wish you'd known at the start of the journey, or a piece of advice that you would give based on what you've learned to the
Mm.
people listening to this podcast. What would be your one key piece of guidance?
It's gonna sound weird. It'll sound very, what's the word, like there's polarities to this type of work, at least in what I'm seeing now, how to do it well. It relates to what I said earlier about taking the complexity upon yourself. I feel like if you're doing this right, then the heavy lifting happens behind the scenes in what we do as an organization for HR, performance management, talent management, and it lands softly with the users. And we've talked a lot about, I don't have to walk back through our process or how we talk to people and all that stuff, but taking those inputs and doing something with them is going to require a lot of work in the background to take the data, understand what it says, verify it with the people that gave it to you or people within the organization to make sure it's right, and then try it, and then come back and try it again and try it again and continue to keep those things open. And that's the bulk of the work that we've been doing within this space for the past, I'd say, year is exactly that. And maybe the people in the organization don't see all that effort and see how hard you're working, but over time it pays off in
Mm,
that ease of use for our clients, which is what we really are trying to focus on. The less work I do in the background to prepare these experiences for these people, then the less likely it's going to provide the value that we're looking for and they're looking for from the process. And that was an important kind of lesson to learn because, like I mentioned earlier, when I came in early on in my career here at Pixelogic, we were managing off the side of the desk and not really focusing on where is the value provided. And that's really helped us to come around to that level of understanding for what it means to do this better than we have in the past. I won't say it's perfect. It probably never will be. And that's good because it's an organization full of people that aren't perfect. And we sometimes need things that are different than what another organization or maybe a specific process or research would say is perfect.
yeah, I guess it's recognizing that this work isn't necessarily easy. It does take
Right.
effort and time, and that you can't just do that iterative cycle once. It's something you have to keep going through and returning to so that you can over time improve your solutions and also stay up to date with the context of the organization because it changes and the organization will change over time. So the work is never done.
Yes.
And even though it can't be seen necessarily, recognizing that the value is for the people and that it will pay off over time and just trusting the process, I suppose, sounds like
Yes.
what you're saying.
Yes. That's a very, very good and very concise way to say it. And that maybe that's where I was going with that point is that the discovering that it has to be and will always be an iterative process. It's not
Hmm.
something that's implementation to implementation, even within a 6 month period, going to be the same and shouldn't potentially be the same. Not that there's maybe not opportunity to stick with 80% of what you have, but very much like so many other things we see in life, change is the only constant. So if you want to keep up with
Yeah.
where life is, you have to be moving and you have to be understanding, okay, what's next? even when you've just spent days and weeks and potentially months building something that you were really hoping was going to scratch the itch. Then you come back and you say, I already see where it is that we could probably push or pull next time to make a bigger difference. And it's the exhausting and exciting part of it, I guess, is the
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Russ, for your time. And thank you to everyone for listening. It's been a really great conversation. So thank you for taking the time.
you're welcome.
All right.